And everybody has their water? Excellent. Good to see you all. I am Jeff Trexler. I think from the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. I recognize a lot of familiar faces, not just from seeing you at the convention generally, but also seeing a number of you at the last panel, so thanks for staying. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund has been around for almost 40 years. Our anniversary year is coming up. Since the Friendly Franks case in 1986, when a comic staffer was arrested and convicted for selling what was at the time the criminally obscene books of heavy metal, works of Richard Corbin, and of course Omaha Cat Dancer, published by Dennis Kitchen, who then put together a fundraiser to fund an appeal, which was successful. The conviction was reversed, and the Legal Defense Fund was formed. And that was the template for a while. We would have plainclothes police coming in, they would look at what was on sale in a rack in a store, and then they would pull some of those books, buy some of those books, or maybe even just take a photograph of the books or make little notes as to what you're showing, and then arrest the staffer at the comic book shop, put them on trial. Sometimes they're convicted, sometimes they're not. We would eventually have in these cases, and that was pretty much what happened. We sort of knew the playbook. A lot has happened since the 1980s. A lot has happened since the 1980s. I don't mean just in like hairstyles, clothes, and music trends, but it's also a lot has happened in the world of censorship. Things have changed, just as things have changed from the 50s and before. And so to talk about that, I have assembled yet another cast of people that I am incredibly impressed by, and I'd love to have on these panels. As I've said, I think multiple times this year, one of the joys of working with this Comic Book Legal Defense Fund is that I get to have panels with people that I have time on. It's the best pre-dinner party conversation that I get to have all year. So I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. I know everybody here I've done multiple panels with. But I would love for you to just say a brief few words about yourselves, and then we're going to dive into this theme of new trends in comic censorship. So, Moni.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I am Moni Barrette. I am a comics librarian. I'll have been a librarian for 20 years next year, which is wild. And I have been an Eisner judge. I also have been the president of American Library Association's Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable. Currently, my day job, I am the director of collection development for Comics Plus, which is something that you can access lots of comics through your library. And I also am the co-founder of the nonprofit Creators Assembly, who has a lot of panels here this weekend.
Hello, my name is Gamal Hennessy. I am an attorney, author, and business consultant who specializes in the comic book industry. Most of my clients are writers, publishers, or artists. That is the vast majority of my clients. Some of them are in video games, or they're in tabletop games, or anything that's actually interesting and fun. If that's what you're doing and you need legal help, you come to me. If you're doing something boring, I don't really take you as a client because I'm not interested. The other thing that I do, though, that I started last year with the help of Moni and Jeff, is a program called Comic Book Advocate, which actually spotlights books, graphic novels specifically, that are being targeted for challenges or bans. And we are in the process of developing another program called Boosted Books, which is going well. I will explain that later because it's a kind of diabolical and insidious plan. And I'm very excited to talk about it, but I'll do it a little bit later.
Hi, I'm Britton Payne, an attorney also. I have been a showbiz attorney for 12-ish years, now 12 years. And I have worked with DC Comics, Nickelodeon recently, and Bros Animation. I also started an autism scene, a nonprofit called the Autism Scene, by trying to get more autistic characters in kids and family and pop culture.
My name is Dirk Raylover. I'm also an attorney. I do entertainment, I do business law, and I write the blog comicsliterary.com. Pretty much what the law said, I also do it because it gives a little more fun stuff that I don't do.
Because you're a more serious lawyer than I am.
So you're all attorneys up here. Wow.
Yes. Yes, true.
Nobody get injured. Everybody get injured on my
No, we also had the amazing Professor Mary Ellen Stout be here and Censorship issue come up. It wasn't able to make it, so we actually had it there. It was not an attorney. Yes, exactly. I still kept it balanced in favor of attorneys, but it's still, But no, Mary, she was a good and censor for that. All right, so Moni, I'll start with you. I saw you most recently at the American Library Association. You are sort of networker par excellence and sort of have know a lot of people in the comics industry who are dealing with this issue, and outside the comics industry who are dealing with this, teachers, librarians, retailers. What do you see happening in the world of censorship? Do you see any changes? Do you see any particularly emerging challenges? I'd be interested in your perspective as a professional in the book world as to what's happening now and how it might be evolving.
Yeah, sure. So book bans and challenges for libraries is nothing new, and I actually remember being a newer librarian and actually being excited to have the opportunity to go to the mayor's office and defend books in our collection from people who were clearly in the wrong, right? We have all these policies and procedures in place to do that, and that was exciting back then because it wasn't the norm. What we're definitely seeing now is that it has been, obviously, it's been growing, it's been more organized, more well-funded. I know you're talking about that kind of in the last panel. And also, there's one good thing is as it's grown, it has reached more of a saturation into the non-library, maybe non-comics people, into the public, to where other people are starting to see it and talk about it. And actually that part is not a bad thing, because I was here at the downtown public library 5 years ago. They paid me to do a talk about how bans and challenges are coming, and everybody's like, we're in San Diego, it's very liberal here, it's not gonna come for us, and even if it did, we're protected. And I'm like, no, these are the organized, and now that it is happening, that's not good, but I think that it's giving people an opportunity to join us kind of in these conversations like all of you here today. So that's one big key difference that I see now is while it's bigger and more organized, we have more folks actually starting to take notice and kind of join us in fighting back against it.
That's a good observation, and a very encouraging one, and I really appreciate that, because so often when we have these conversations, sometimes, and you probably know this from book ban panels as well, sometimes it's like, okay, doom, and then there's gloom, and then there's more doom, and then there's more gloom. And I love that you're starting off with the fact that with the rise in challenges, there's also a rise in response, and I hope that's something we all keep in mind throughout the conversation. Gamal?
Yeah, well, when I started Comic Book Advocate, the thing was, most of the work that I do is getting comic books created and published in the first place. So there's so many challenges and so many stressors for artists and writers to even get a book published in the first instance. I wasn't really focused on what happened afterward, what happened when the book is on shelf and the book gets challenged. So I had to do a lot of learning about what that process was, and you first learn about the super PACs that are kind of organized for pro-censorship activities, but then thanks to Moni and thanks to Jeff, I learned about things like shadow banning or weeding, where a book was on the shelf and then it gets pulled off the shelf, but there's no challenge, there is no kind of process, it's just part of the normal function of how a library works, but the books that are being pulled off just happen to be all of the same types of books that are often challenged, and that's a more, I don't want to say insidious type of censorship or book ban, but it's much harder to track and be aware of, because what I do at Comic Book Advocate is collect all of the major book ban stories for the month, because usually they're in very local newspapers or very small radio station kind of announcements, and in the comic book industry, we often focus on the really, really big ban stories, like genderqueer is a huge story flavor is a huge story, but there's been instances where Calvin and Hobbes has been banned, or the graphic novel adaptation of Hamlet has been banned, but it's not on a national level or even on a state level, it's on a very local level. So I've been trying to raise awareness of all of those different types of bans and just trying to track what's happening specifically for graphic novels, because there are actually quite a few organizations that are protecting books in general from censorship. When you have PEN America, or you have the ACLU, or you have things like that. However, and that was very dramatic. However, comic books are traditionally left out of that protection umbrella. And that goes all the way back to Seduction of the Innocent and Dr. Henry Wortham, Jeffrey Wortham, whatever his name was. Frederick. He's not a cool guy anyway.
Or Freddie.
You guys see Frederick. So I wanted to create something that specifically targets protecting graphic novels from censorship, because graphic novels are very easy targets for censorship, because it's very easy to isolate one particular panel of a graphic novel and hold it up at a community board meeting or a school board meeting and say, because of this one panel taken out of context with no explanation, the entire thing must be appealing to the pure interest, and then everybody gets riled up, and then the book gets banned. No one actually bothers to read it. It's very difficult to take, for a book of censor who doesn't really want to read the book anyway, to read an entire book of prose and then find a paragraph that then gets the book banned. It's easy with a comic. You guys have all been on the show floor. You flip through a comic, you can see any panel you want. Take that out and ban it. So what I've seen is there's a lot of different levels of censorship, but it's all on a lot of it is on a very, very small scale, and you don't see the damage unless you look at the bigger picture.
I want to highlight, before we go over to Britton Payne, there's something you said there that you can get a little granular about a case, because it gets at something that has been incredibly important. It's essential to everything we've been trying to do the past few years. I think there was a sense among some people, oh, CCLF, it's like the ACLU, but for comics. But the idea is that we're just really a First Amendment group, just another First Amendment group with all these. No, we are the comic book, graphic novels, and manga, and anything with comic arts. That's what we protect, especially that, and for special reasons, because they're especially being targeted. And what Gamal highlighted about people not protecting comics, there's a case where the legislature had enacted a new law attacking text and depictions that were deemed inappropriate for children, right? And of course, you'll be totally shocked to learn that when this law was being advocated, and then when the state filed its own briefs, it would be pictures from genderqueer, pictures from flamer, pictures. And the decision was made, not by me, to drop the challenge to the depictions portion of the statute, because that would be too hard to win. And that, I think about that almost daily. When we fight, we really are fighting for graphic novels. And there isn't a consensus among lawyers that graphic novels deserve to be protected. There's a sense that graphic novels are too hard because they're pictures. They can be too hard to defend. I've heard principals and superintendents in the state of New York, in the counties bordering New York City, say that because the pictures are just, they're too intense. They affect children too much. So let's get rid of the manga, let's get rid of the graphic novels, because they're just too risky to have in the school. This is I was about to say New York, Evan City. But this is New York State. And so even though we may not have new laws that are banning comics in particular, when you're not defending, when you're not challenging a statute that targets depictions, you're only going to challenge the text part. that speaks to something that is still deeply wrong that has continued since the 1950s.
Well, I'm sure the other members of the panel can concur with what I'm about to say. Is when you're actually thinking about strategy and tactics for a legal fight, you look at the pieces of the case where you know you're strong and you focus on those. And you look at the pieces of the case where you're weak and you figure, okay, maybe I'll let those pieces go because I'll win the larger battle, the larger war. But our entire industry is the piece that they're going to cut off and toss away so that they can protect, you know, all of the fantastic prose authors who are out in the world and the poets and everybody else, which is fine. So, which is why all of my focus has been, okay, we're just going to protect graphic novels because I don't want us left out in the cold.
I would actually just real quick say that it's that way in libraries and schools too, is because, you know, comics are such a small fraction of all the things that library workers and schools are doing, that it's kind of the same thing. If they're not a comics librarian who like knows what's in the graphic novels and knows which ones are which age appropriate or whatever else, they're just gonna be like, sorry, not gonna buy those, or sorry, I'm gonna take this one that was rated by the publisher as being teen but has an LGBT plus QIA person like existing in the book, and we're gonna age it up to mature, or we're gonna not even buy it at all because we haven't read it, we don't wanna defend it because we don't understand it. And even a little bit of bias, right? Because especially in libraries, it's like, you've got picture books, so those have to be for little kids, and so that misconception that, you know, genderqueer was made for children when it absolutely was not. It never has been available in libraries for children, but that's kind of that bias and that misconception where people just take the picture out of context and go, no, that's for children, and clearly that's not appropriate for children, so let's just not have comics because it's too scary, this is what could be in them.
Yeah, when the Overton window shifts to evolve what is going to put you in danger in terms of censorship, where somebody you're going to get in trouble, you know, where your client is going to get in trouble, then that's the sort of tendril that reaches out into other decision making. It's decision making on the part of people who want to adapt graphic novels. I don't know if genderqueer would have been adapted, but I suspect now that at least somebody making a decision acquired and decided to develop it into a show, whatever, is now factoring this risk that maybe they won't be able to get their intended audience, or maybe they'll be subject to protest or whatever, because it became famous through this shifting the Overton window into what will the government go after. And those decisions, unfortunately, are things that we can see under the current administration and the way that it has been using its censorship efforts to, you know, express values and to reinforce certain values. And if you agree with those values, you're like, good, I'm glad this is happening. If you disagree with those values, or you think that we should be in a more neutral, have our government be in a neutral position as to the content of the work to which we can be exposed, then you don't think it's very good. It's also interesting to think about the technology and ways that these problems potentially could be solved in a way that you might find objectionable. There was a case many years ago about somebody in Utah who wanted to show their kid Titanic, but cut out the dirty bits and let the kid watch Titanic, right? And so it's easy to giggle as a liberal about that and say, oh, you're being crazy. But if you are a parent, that's a decision you've made. You don't want to expose your children to certain kinds of things. They either get to see Titanic, or they don't get to see Titanic. And then there's this third option. So I don't remember exactly how the case was, it's a very famous case. It did make me think that parents should have that kind of option if they want to be able to engage their kids in this kind of popular culture and not necessarily expose them to parts that they find troublesome. That doesn't mean that censorship is the answer. And I think if I'm an artist, maybe I would say I would rather your kid not see it than see it without, you know, the full way I intended. But it certainly feels rational that technology will now let us dodge those frames. My kids listen to Kids Bop, if you know what Kids Bop is, or if you don't know what Kids Bop is. They take the popular songs of the day and re-record them with kids singing them and change enough of the words so that when your kid sings in the back seat, you don't feel weird. Their Overton window is extraordinarily conservative. You know, they don't say the word liquor, they don't want to say, I want you to be my man, they say, I want you to be my one. And honestly, when my 9-year-old daughter sings along, I'm like, hey man, I'm glad she's not singing about dating men. That feels odd to me. But it's still something that is done by the creators of the work making our decisions, and it is not precisely censorship. It's sort of it's curating for your family what is best. You can't do that if the government's blocking things from existence in the first place.
I think I did hear about something like that because somehow someone decided that they were going to take a Wu-Tang album and make it kid friendly. And if you've ever, I mean, Wu-Tang is for children, right? But somehow when I heard it, it seemed like it was worse that they heard it that way than to not hear it at all.
I understand this, and I would comfortably debate this, because it also, that's an interesting notion, right? But we also know, like, Stand from the Beginning, the Hebrew Kennedy prose book that is a tremendous history, is also quite dense. And he had it adapted by Joe Christian Gill to sort of adult comics readers, and Joe Christian Gill put a lot of himself into it, so it almost feels like a new work. And then they also adapted it into a children's book. So the children's book is probably considerably sillier than the main book, and certainly Joel Christian Gill's book has, you know, very serious bits of historical information, and then Sergio Aragonés style like commentary on it. You feel like you're almost reading a Mad Magazine version of this history of slavery and enslavement in the United States. And it is tremendous. It is a diluted or distorted version of the original work, but nonetheless, the ideas that were at play in that book made it to the world. And so even if the kids' version of Shake It Off, you know, makes you want to claw your ears out, it still maybe is entertaining to somebody. And then they get this message from Taylor Swift that sometimes people are mean to you, and if you can shake it off and ignore that, that's terrific. So my kid got that message, and I'm not as familiar with Wu-Tang, but you know, I might imagine they have messages that people want to hear as well.
Yeah. So we're going to turn this into a should we censor kids spot.
I'm over here just thinking, like, you know, what would you think? I was recently at my daughter's Girl Scout in Milwaukee, where I'm based out of, and they started playing Chaperones, HOTTOGO, and you've got a bunch of 7 to 13-year-old girls singing along to the song, and I'm just like, thankfully they don't understand the subtext. It's fine, you know, they don't understand the subtext. I'm not gonna, you know, it's good, it's fine. So anytime you hear those things, I just roll with it, it's fun, you know. At some point they might go on to like, oh, that's what I know when I was a kid, I was the same way. Things just go over your head. If you don't know it, you don't get it.
But things also go into your head too. I mean, I know we're talking more about comic books, but I think about the Let's Get It Started by Black Eyed Peas, which was, Get It Started was not how it originally was presented. And very quickly, and I remember walking through Bed Bath & Beyond, 6th Avenue, and I'm like, are they really saying the R word in like a song? Like, that feels weird. But it was 15 years ago, arguably we didn't know better, we're just learning. That's not a word that really we should be using our next one. And then they very quickly evolved it into Let's Get It Started. So I don't know what happened. I imagine somebody like me called the other department and said, I can't believe you let this song get out, why don't you do this, do a different version? And because I do believe that when you have a song or a comic book or anything like that, presenting material to your kids, it does normalize it. And I think that's the rationale behind the censorship in the first place of something like gender queer. Because the political motivation, or the ethical motivation, I don't want to disparage somebody's interest in expressing their values, but in preventing somebody else from receiving material, obviously that's the problem. Because their concern is they are getting into somebody's head, even if they're not understanding fully the content of what's going on, they are seeing something normalized that this other group thinks should not be normalized.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not one of them, by the way. I'm really just lined up that way. But I do think it's important to consider the people who are on the other side of our arguments, because they're the ones whose minds we have to change.
like, this is also one of the, I have another point I wanted to make on the site to track that, because it's more practical than the overall thing. More practical for creators right now. But one of the reasons, this is where I'm going to get in my rant, which I didn't know if I was going to get into. One of the reasons why I feel like we're here is because it's so easy for politicians to just go, oh, you have to protect the children. They don't want to take hard stands because it looks bad for them, gives the opposition something that they can fight against. They can use to attack their elections and not get reelected. So it's a lot of self-interest for themselves to be like, well, I just don't want to deal with this. Like, I don't want someone to say that, I support adult content creators, that I support, trying to figure out a way to say this without, offending people in the room. But, like if someone's accused of like making pedophilia content, then it's like, okay, then you support pedophiles here because they're worried about those types of things, and that allows the censorship to creep. Because it seems very easy for us to say, I understand this, like, I don't want my kid exposed to this, but by the same token, what if someone else's parent does? They want them to have this type of experience, they want them to learn these types of things. It is, to your point, it's not great to have the, yes, you can have it, or no, you can't. But by the same token, it should be up to the artist to decide whether or not they want to compromise their vision to allow for a broader audience. And some of them obviously do. I mean, obviously, like these examples are great ones. I forgot that that was in the original title of the song, but it probably got changed because, it is SDCC licensing. Someone was probably complaining, it's like, this is not something we should be able to air all the time.
I wonder. Well, when you're thinking about the political pressure and the value to a politician of being able to say no and take a strong stance and stuff, one of the pressures on the other side, I suspect, is what Jeff is doing. And to the extent that it can be just as costly to say yes to censorship because of the work that the CCLDF is doing, that is maybe a rational counter pressure to that, rather than trying to sort of generate a lot of money, pay it to the politician to then begin censorship.
I think where the problem that we're going to have is between those two forces of trying to protect the people who don't want their children or whoever to see certain things, and the people who do, and the politicians who are trying to make those decisions. I think when they draw that line, comics is on the wrong side of that line, and that therein lies the problem.
The thing that keeps popping in my head is one of the reasons why is because comics can be such a powerful, easily accessible medium. More people can read it, access it, understand it in an easier manner, usually, than reading a 300-page novel.
Yeah. But another aspect though is like every time I bought comics as a kid, there was a big sign above the rack that said, "Hey kids, comics."
Yeah.
And now we obviously know that as people in this room and probably in this whole entire building, we know that comics are not just for kids. And in the very beginning, I don't know that they entirely were. Very quickly they were adopted by GIs and adults who were not strong readers to know that they consume stories if they're not going to be reading prose. But nonetheless, the public mind, especially people who grew out of comics when they were 8 years old or 10 years old or whatever, and never quite went back, it is easy to imagine what would live in their mind is comics is a children's medium. And so if there's a dirty picture in comics, it's someone trying to show a dirty picture to children.
They still make comics?
I make copies every Wednesday.
There's so much packed into what you all are saying, and I don't want to get a little bit too deep in my weeds. I keep thinking about cases we're doing and things like that, and I'm going, okay, well, there's people trying to shift from age appropriate to age relevant in sort of one aspect of it, and algorithm censorship in another aspect of it. And again, this thing that's emerging for a number of these discussions, sort of the special nature of comics, the power of comics, and why they are particularly feared, and how they are at once powerful, mainstream, and marginalized at the same time. Is just one of this core contradiction that we have to deal with, because they are an easy target, and a number of decisions that are, and they're easy targets in weird ways. Let me give you another one. A way that things are evolving, maybe Moni, as a librarian, you can explain a little bit more about this. There was a case where there's actually several cases we didn't get involved because the graphic novels were being removed, and the justification that the library successfully was coming back with was, well, we're removing them not because of the content, because nobody's reading them, all right, because they weren't checked out now. And this is in New York as well as some other states. Now, I happen to live near one of the libraries in question. So I go to the section where these books are being removed. And these books are barely being held together. These spines are creased. And I just watched what was happening at this library. It was happening at this library. Kids would come in, they'd read a manga series, they'd read a whole DC, Batgirl graphic novel, the special stuff that's being done for kids now. They read these things to death. But you know what they would not do? Is check them out. But the whole metric with respect to reading that Gamal mentioned was how many times they're checked out, not how many times they're moved from the shelves, and how many times they're reshelved. But if the kids are spending 8 hours a day reading graphic novels, that counts for 0 in terms of the metrics for graphic novels and manga, and so they get removed.
See, but that's a cop-out, because a little bit from the libraries.
I wasn't copying it.
Yeah, no, the libraries part. Yeah, no, because 5 or 10 years ago, I remember pushing my staff to start doing in-house circulation,
Yep.
which is where you check on what has clearly been removed from the shelf and put elsewhere. And that's why, for the love of heaven, like if I don't impart anything else of wisdom today, don't reshelve your books at the library, please. You won't put them in the right place. You just won't. And that's okay, you're not supposed to. But also, when you put them, even leave them on the table you're at. That's the one place you don't have to clean up after yourself. Leave it there, because the staff can then go and know that that has been checked out. They should be hopefully scanning it or somehow formally noting that it's been read and used. But even if it's just anecdotal and they're like, wow, I keep seeing these same topics, left out on the tables. But that's where that in-house, it's called circulation, but checkouts, basically, that in-house use should be counted instead of just saying, oh, hasn't been checked out as in removed from the library for someone to borrow, we're just gonna get rid of it.
No.
And I'm curious if they're either not keeping those stats, or they're not keeping the stats. Okay, so I shouldn't be so quick to judge.
I've got some conversations, like part of the training I do need to think like, well, Jeff does a training for people on opposing censorship must be, how do you fight? How do you like, no, like, okay, look at your library and think about, I know maybe you can't afford censors, but think about ways that you can track every time this book is out and has to be put back. That basic level can save a book.
Absolutely, because you're using taxpayer dollars to purchase these books, and if you can't say that the community is checking them out, there's no leg to stand on. So they need those in-house statistics as well. That data, we're actually having a panel on why data matters. That's a big part of that.
But I wonder what you all think about another kind of censorship, and that is algorithmic censorship of comics, either in terms of keeping them from being ordered, keeping them from being marketed, or keeping them from being read. And I know that goes from how metadata is, how things are, elements of a book are categorized in metadata, and that goes into how they're chosen for distribution, to how they're accessed by the consumer. And I'll give you from a real world case. You may remember that I was in the gender group, we become a good friends when I was in the gender group case, and I represented my co-baby author. And Dirk and Britt were talking about being accused of the child with problems with children, right? And so that accusation was made about the book. That accusation has been made about me and us and the work that we do. And I was interacting with lawyers for other clients in the case, and then I didn't get any emails. Day one, we were emailing multiple times a day, and I didn't get any emails. Day two, I didn't get any emails. Day three, no emails, no emails. And I was like, what's going on? And so I called the lawyers, no, we've been talking, but you just seem to have dropped out and ghosted us. It turned out, when I went through all my email, that all of my email related to not just the gender queer case, but any comics that could be deemed to be obscene or problematic, was being routed by our CDLDF uses Gmail. It was being routed by our Gmail, not to spam, but to trash. My lawyer conversations, potential case reports, anything that had to do with censorship was all of a sudden had been filtered by Gmail to my trash, so that I couldn't even see it for disposal in like a week or whatever, so that I couldn't, if I checked my spam, it wasn't even there. And now I'm getting emails with CDLDF about, well, their payments, they can't get the payments for their webcomic or for their graphic novel that they're doing independently because the bank says it's obscene, so it's against their terms and conditions. I mean, what do you think of this as a threat to the extent that it's threatened? How in the hell do we respond?
I'm not smart enough for algorithms to be able to say there is an actual technical solution, especially for a comic book artist, especially someone who's trying to distribute a webtoon and they're trying to do it independently, for all the other things they have to do, the last thing that you can ask these people to do, these creators to do, is to fight against Google's algorithm to get their book more widely circulated. A lot of them just stop making comments about it. But I do think there are ways to actually leverage the technology to actually combat censorship. I've been discussing this with Moni for the past few months, and the idea, the diabolical plan that I've come up with, is to actually leverage the attempts at censorship to specifically engender wider circulation. Because as I said, censorship actually usually happens on the school board level or the community level, which is in a very specific zip code. And then that story gets posted as a news story in a local paper. But with a Google alert, I find out about many of the books that are being banned. And you may not realize this, but the Brooklyn Public Library has a system where you, no matter where you live in the country, you can get a Brooklyn Public library card, and they have a vast graphic novel and comic book collection. The trick then becomes to just go on to TikTok, get yourself an account where you can actually make geographically specific posts to the zip codes that the book has just been banned. Let them all know, hey, this book has been banned in your city, but you can go get a Brooklyn Public Library account and access the book. And every time the book gets banned, I can go out and tell people, once again, go, your book is banned in your city, but go get the book anyway if you want it. This actually solves one of the other problems that have come up recently, where the super PACs are not necessarily trying to ban books, they're trying to get librarians arrested. They're trying to get people to lose their jobs. But this system, this diabolical plan that I've come up with, does not involve any librarian. No librarian in any city can be accused of circulating this book to their community because they didn't do it. I did it. And I'm not a librarian. So what are you going to do?
And I think that's our answer in part of living in a capitalist society, is that we expect there to be competition in the marketplace. If we find that the social networks that we've been involved in, or one in particular, is no longer serving our needs, then that means that there's a marketplace for an alternative social network like the one that Gamal just described. And now that's hard work, and another way to sort of help with competitive marketplace is to see if there's a monopoly or an enormous presence. So it's easy to see that in search that Google is pretty singular, and in networking it used to be that Facebook was pretty singular. So you can have a government that looks at that and says, oh, these companies are too big, that's anti-competitive, let's break them up. And then potentially you're making smaller competitors so that it becomes more normal for a consumer to switch from one network to another the same way that you might switch in the olden days from ABC to NBC. And those are like rules of the game type things that we might expect our government to do, not this particular administration, but it is the kind of thing that we can make noise about and you can present alternatives. We all found when we wanted to be able to carry around our songs in our new iPods, that if there wasn't a legitimate source available for them, that we would follow an illegitimate source. That's what Napster was. And then eventually iTunes was like, oh, if we just sell them for $1, people would rather buy them for $1 than go through the trouble of dealing with Napster and other forces. And so similarly, we are going to need alternative ways of finding the works that are out there if we're going to have censorship in the places that we usually go.
I have two thoughts, which is, first, I feel like that is even under attack a bit as well, especially some of the stuff that's going on in Texas and the UK, where you have to upload your ID, credit card, if you're a certain age in order to get stuff. So I'm a little different here. I'm going to go a little different with this one, maybe a little more liberal. But this is even something my wife and I kind of butt heads about a little, but I don't like how people look for other people to make decisions about what their children are doing. I feel like, I don't necessarily want the technology to filter this out. Like, if my kid was holding something and I didn't do the due diligence, and it's like not a for them, that's on me. I should be able to do it. I feel like we should work on parents to kind of guide this and be like, you know what, I don't think this is appropriate for you at this stage, let's revisit this. Or it is like, I when my kids watch stuff recently, I'm like, oh, I should have done that. Oh, well, I think it's maybe a little too old for them. Like, we might have to have a conversation now.
There's a lot of oh well in parenting.
Yeah, it definitely is. But those are the things. The technology just worries me because it's impartial. You can't control it a bit, but it blocks things that might not necessarily want to block, that you don't necessarily want. And especially when you have those third parties making these decisions for you, I just don't like that. I like being able to take that responsibility myself to figure out what my kids can actually see and access.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I worked for Nickelodeon for a long time, and I really appreciate the trademark value of having kids' content with the DC bullet on it or Nickelodeon Splat, and being able to say, like, okay, I can't keep up with my daughter's voracious graphic novel reading speed. I'm glad that I can see something on there that makes me believe it's probably okay. But that's still a challenge, and that results in some oh well. And again, it's another, you look at the marketplace. But then there's the question of kids who need to see things that their parents don't want them to see. And I think that's a much harder question. And it could be my kids, it could be about something that I'm unaware of or I'm too old to really appreciate, or that it's different times or whatever. But if they're struggling with something, they're going to find solace in books that suddenly are available to them. I feel like that's really terrible. And that I don't know how to solve, because you are talking about putting a wedge between parents and their kids.
There is another, for all of the, I think, potential benefits of the diabolical plan, it does not, there are certain things it does not address. It does not address the idea that we do not have 100% cell phone penetration in the United States. So there may be potentially millions of people this plan can help, but there's probably millions of people that can't help, because you can't see the TikTok that says you can get the digital library card that says you can download the digital book if you don't have a phone and you don't have a laptop. The library could still get you that book if the library had the book. I don't know how to solve that particular problem yet, and there's another
Shadow libraries.
I thought about a truck. That truck would drive around in the cities but I live in New York. I don't really drive, so it's not, that wasn't a good solution. The other solution, the other problem is much more insidious, because a lot of, and this actually was brought up in the panel before, there's a book called On Tyranny, I believe Thomas Snyder. On Tyranny was a book that got very well known in the first Trump administration, and basically 20 ideas that you can use to fight against authoritarian regimes. The first rule in that book was do not comply in advance. And there are, what I'm seeing at the production end of getting comic books out is that there are certain publishers who are deciding, well, if this book is probably going to get banned, then I'm not going to pick up the book. And then there are agents who want to deal with the publishers who will get the potential client, who's an artist or a writer, and they won't pick up the client because they don't think the publisher will pick up the book, and the publisher thinks that the book will get banned, which trickles down to the creator who may have an amazing story they want to tell, and then decide to never make the story because they can't get an agent, because they can't get a publisher, because the publisher thinks the book's going to get banned. And there's nothing that we can do up here to help promote the story that was never created. Go ahead.
Oh, please.
Well, Comic Book Legal Defense Fund and people like Moni and Dirk and I, we can help you when the book gets challenged, if the book gets challenged. We can figure out workarounds to get the books to the people who want to read them. If you make them, if you don't make them because you think they're going to get censored, well, they were censored because you censored them when you didn't make it. So go make your comments. We'll figure it out on the other end. That's really what I was saying.
It's a very interesting question about the self-censorship and whether it's in terms of the books that you acquire or the books that you create. And it's getting even more complex when we talk about new trends. Thanks so much. Here's one, a couple, we've helped a bunch of companies. A lot of what we've done is we don't put in the press releases anymore for various reasons. But I can think of two companies, past that we've assisted have had, the issue that it's finally hit the press in a recent Publishers Weekly article where they sent their books to China for printing. And in China, there's a government, censorship process, and their content, it's LGBTQ content in most cases, was deemed to be inappropriate for printing, which meant that it didn't just apply to content by Chinese authors to be distributed in China, but that also applied to content that was being printed in China for delivery elsewhere. And if you were advising whether authors or particularly publishers, if people are getting work printed in China, I mean, what would you advise people to do as they're facing this situation?
See, this is where censorship and publishing butts heads with the economics of publishing. Because the short economic answer is not to get too deep in the weeds on how books are printed, but there's offset printing where you print in bulk, and there's like digital printing where you can print one-off things. If you can do digital printing domestically, then you can avoid dealing with the censorship issues that come out of Chinese censorship, but the cost per unit to digital print a book now makes the book economically, in many cases, makes the book economically not viable. So there are technological and physical ways to get around that, but then you have to figure out, well, what do I have to price this book at, and how many books do I have to sell for it to make sense in my profit and loss statement? And now it's not about censorship, it's about, are we all going to be homeless because we're making these comments?
I'm not going to answer that question. I have something else to raise, but that's my first point, and we're running out of time.
Yeah.
One of the things that I don't know if I'm just key to it more because of who I work with and some of the creators I work with who are, oftentimes, gay, non-binary, gender neutral, and that type of thing, and some of it gets reflected in the works they create. And when they make creator-owned works, some of the things I'm seeing on the front end is I'm starting to see morals clauses a little bit more often in these contracts, where a publisher is going to cancel the contract and stop the book if, basically they feel like it goes against the community's morals, like morals or outrage or it's obscene or something like that. And I keep trying to advise my clients on these things. Like, I hate those things. I don't think they should be in there, period. Not every publisher is maybe, hopefully as good as owning books where they can stick up and, keep fighting for their books. Some of them might be like, oh, there's pushback on this thing? I don't want to deal with this. Like, it's too much. And a lot of them are written in a way where if they cancel that contract, you should tell the money back to them. And that's just, you don't want that. Like, you need to be, if you're creating something that might be running the lines of this type of thing, pay attention to those types of contracts, pay attention to those phrases. See what you can do with it.
I just got the cue. It's not a censorship cue. It is it's actually at the end of time cue. So I'm going to do one last question, and I'd love to have Q&A, and I'm sorry we went a little long. These are fascinating discussions here. So I'm just going to have one quick parting thought for everybody about the future, and then we will let them move to the next panel. So Moni, we'll start with you, and then Victor.
Oh, the future of censorship?
Yes. And comics in the face of censorship.
You know what?
Quick thought.
And this is kind of a plug too, but come to the Creators Assemble Networking from 4 to 6 because it's tables, it's 15 to 20 minutes conversations in small groups where we're having discussions like these. What should go into your contracts to make sure that you don't get screwed? To make sure that you're not getting censored, that you're not, what can we do about these things? So that's one thing that I want to see more of is more like people like you showing up to these things, people having these discussions, and no one of us has all the expertise or all the solutions, but I bet together we could take a good dent out of some of this.
The last thing I want to say is basically just reiterating my last point. If you are a comic creator, if you are a comic book publisher, it doesn't matter what story you want to tell your story. Whether or not it gets censored, there are resources that can help you kind of get around that and deal with that and actually elevate your story, but we can't do that if you don't make the story. So go make your story. Go make some comics, is what I'm saying.
And if you're not somebody who makes comments, support the troublemakers in your life. You can use a pat on the back.
I agree with that. And I think information always wants to be free, information wants to flow. The good information will be recognized, and censorship is usually, output of weakness because the information we're trying to censor is usually powerful and it's a threat to them. So, keep at it. If you see something you don't like, I am not, gay or anything like that, but the more people fight against gay people, the gayer I want to be. I get so sick of it. I'm just like, you know what, I don't like the video, I'm going to fight against it.
Yeah, I think we have to wrap up.
I think we do have to wrap up, so thank you all, thank you for your panel. Have a great rest of the day.